In life, there are moments that seem small, insignificant even, but they hold the power to change everything. A typical college classroom, a sharp-tongued professor known for her bold critiques, and a quiet young man, one who had spent years in the shadows, never drawing attention to himself. But that day, when his mother was mocked right in front of him, Daniel Carter did something no one expected. He stood up. The room fell silent. And then, a single sentence, piercing, filled with conviction, shook the entire lecture hall. It left a renowned professor speechless, sent shockwaves through the classroom, and ignited a national conversation when the video went viral across America. What really happened in that lecture? What made someone who had always chosen silence finally speak up? And how did a professor, so confident in her own beliefs, find her perspective shattered in a single moment? This is a story that will challenge the way we see others, the way we judge, and the way we listen. Let's uncover the truth behind that unforgettable day. The bell rang in Lecture Hall 204 at Westwood University, one of the most prestigious schools in Massachusetts. Students filed in, chatting animatedly, laughter mixing with the rustling of notebooks and textbooks. No one knew that this class would soon become the talk of the nation. In the third row, a young man sat quietly, just as he did every day, Daniel Carter, the son of a former U.S. president. But today, he was simply Daniel, a student who had chosen to hide his real identity in order to experience life on his own terms. He didn't want special treatment. He didn't want judgment, positive or negative, because of his last name. He wanted to be seen for his mind, not his lineage. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, Daniel exuded a calm, almost unshakable presence. He was not the loudest in the room, nor did he seek attention. But there was something about him, a quiet strength, a depth that set him apart. He was always watching, listening, thinking, and when the moment came, he would not remain silent. What happens next will leave you speechless. At the front of the lecture hall, Professor Linda Hayes entered with an air of confidence. Her sharp gaze swept across the room, her neatly styled short hair framing a face that exuded intelligence and authority. At 50 years old, she was a seasoned media critic, a frequent guest on major debate panels, and a name that carried weight in academic circles. To her, a classroom was not just a place for teaching, it was a battleground for ideas. She scanned the room, then flashed a knowing, almost provocative smile. "Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss what truly makes a public image powerful." The class sat up, intrigued. Professor Hayes's lectures were always sharp, sometimes controversial, but that's exactly why students love them. In the front row, Emily Brooks, a top student in the Media Studies program, sat upright, eyes gleaming with interest. Emily was brilliant, sharp-minded, but she had a deep skepticism toward politics. To her, world leaders were nothing more than carefully crafted personas, polished by PR teams to fit whatever narrative the public wanted to believe. She nudged her best friend, Aaron, who was busy adjusting his phone camera. "Here we go again," she whispered. "Who do you think she's going to tear apart today?" Aaron chuckled, lowering his voice. "As long as she doesn't go after someone in this room, we should be fine." Neither of them knew that today's discussion would turn into something far bigger than just another debate. Professor Hayes turned to the board and, with a flourish, wrote 2 words in bold letters: "Perception versus reality." The room fell into an anticipatory silence. Something told Daniel this was not going to be an ordinary lecture. And he was right. Professor Hayes turned back to the class, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room. "We often believe the images that the media presents to us," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, is it the truth?" The room fell into a focused silence. "Let's consider an example," she continued. "A public figure, always impeccably dressed, reserved, mysterious, but admired for their elegance. We don't know much about them, yet society celebrates them. But is that real value? Or is it just a carefully crafted illusion?" She paused for effect, then turned to the board and wrote a name that instantly made Daniel's chest tighten: Elena Carter. A shift rippled through the lecture hall. Some students exchanged amused glances. A few chuckled under their breath. Daniel clenched his hands lightly. He knew this wasn't going to be just another lecture. Emily leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. This should be interesting. In the back, Aaron casually adjusted his phone, unintentionally hitting the record button, completely unaware that he was about to capture a moment that would change Daniel Carter's life forever. And Daniel? He sat still, barely breathing. He had promised himself he would stay unnoticed, that his identity would remain hidden. But as the professor's next words echoed through the hall, he knew he wouldn't stay silent for much longer. Let's take Elena Carter as an example, Professor Hayes began, her tone laced with subtle mockery. A woman praised by the media for her elegance, her flawless appearance. But tell me, has she actually contributed anything meaningful to society? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A few students let out soft chuckles. Others exchanged glances, waiting to see where this was going. Daniel tightened his fists under the desk, his heartbeat pounding in his chest. But he stayed silent. He knew better than to react too quickly. In the front row, Emily raised an intrigued eyebrow. "This is going to be a good one," she murmured. Professor Hayes walked over to the board and wrote 2 words in large letters. Image versus substance. Melania Trump was celebrated for her grace and composure, she continued, her voice razor-sharp. But is she truly a role model worth honoring? The classroom buzzed with murmurs. We had a first lady whose speeches were often overshadowed by comments about her accent rather than the substance of her words. A woman who launched the Be Best initiative to combat online bullying, yet was married to a man infamous for his controversial remarks on social media. Laughter erupted from a corner of the room. And Daniel, he felt his blood heat up. Should I stay silent? Or should I say something? He scanned the room. No one knew who he really was. But deep down, he knew. If he didn't speak up, no one else would. Professor Hayes had no idea she had just pushed one student in the room past his breaking point. Then suddenly, the quiet student in the 3rd row raised his hand. The atmosphere froze. Professor Hayes paused mid-sentence, her sharp eyes snapping toward Daniel. A few students turned in their seats, curiosity flickering in their expressions. This was new. This was unexpected. Emily arched an eyebrow. Weird. I've never heard him say a word before. Aaron, sensing something big was about to happen, quickly switched his phone to record mode. Daniel took a deep breath. He no longer cared who was watching. He no longer cared if someone figured out who he really was. He rose to his feet, locking eyes with Professor Hayes. Then, in a voice calm yet powerful, he spoke. "Professor," Daniel said, his words carrying weight beyond their volume. "You make an interesting point. But let me ask you something. Have you ever actually tried to understand who Elena Carter is, or are you only seeing her through the image the media has created for you?" And with that, the entire lecture hall held its breath.